I am Julian, and I am 24 years old. Exactly 6 months ago, I was brutally pushed down a steep flight of concrete stairs in a hospital stairwell by my own flesh and blood. While I was lying there at the bottom of that landing, gasping for air with broken ribs and a shattered wrist, my parents rushed through the heavy fire doors. But they did not check on me. My mother immediately threw her arms around my older brother, Marcus. She stroked his hair and looked down at my bleeding body with absolute disgust, saying, "It was an accident, right, Julian? You really need to be more careful. You scared your brother half to death." They literally stepped right over my broken, bleeding body to comfort the man who had just intentionally tried to end my life. But there was one crucial thing they did not know. The hospital's head trauma nurse had already locked down the entire ward, and a hidden high-definition security camera had captured every single second of his premeditated attack. And right now, my parents and my golden child brother are facing complete financial ruin, utter public humiliation, and severe legal consequences, begging for a mercy they never once showed me. Before I tell you exactly how it all went down and how they lost everything, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section below. Now, let's go back to the exact moment this nightmare began. The cold, unforgiving concrete of the hospital stairwell pressed hard against my left cheek. I could taste the sharp, metallic flavor of copper in my mouth, pooling behind my teeth. My vision was swimming in dark, dizzying circles. Every single breath I took felt like a jagged, rusty knife twisting directly into my chest cavity. The pain was blinding, suffocating, and absolute. I tried to move my fingers, but my right arm was bent at a completely unnatural angle, sending violent shockwaves of agony up to my shoulder. Above me, standing on the top landing like a conquering king looking over his battlefield, was my 28-year-old brother, Marcus. He did not look panicked. He did not look remotely remorseful. He looked incredibly satisfied. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across his face. He casually reached up and dusted off the lapels of his expensive designer jacket. The exact same jacket my parents had bought him for his birthday using money they claimed they didn't have when I asked for help with my college tuition. He smirked down at me, his eyes dark and empty. "Always the perfect grandson, aren't you, Julian?" Marcus sneered, his voice echoing loudly in the empty, sterile stairwell. "Always making everyone else look bad with your daily hospital visits and your pathetic little homemade care packages. You really think you are better than me, don't you? You think you can just swoop in and steal what is rightfully mine." I tried to push myself up using my good arm, but the sheer force of the pain made my vision go entirely black for a terrifying second. "Marcus?" I choked out, my voice sounding weak and pathetic even to my own ears. "Grandma is waiting for us. You need to help me up." "Everything is about you, Julian," he spat, taking one slow, deliberate step down toward me. "It always has been. Poor little Julian. So smart, so caring, so utterly perfect. I am absolutely sick of it. You are nothing but a roadblock." That was when the performance began. Marcus reached into his tailored pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and completely changed his entire demeanor. The smug, arrogant predator vanished in a fraction of a second. In his place stood a terrified, frantic, innocent victim. It was a terrifying transformation, a performance so deeply practiced and worthy of an Oscar. He dialed a number, his hands suddenly shaking with artificial terror. "Mom! Dad! Come quick to stairwell B." Marcus cried into the phone, his voice cracking with manufactured panic and fake tears. Julian fell down the stairs. I tried to grab his shirt. I tried to catch him, but I couldn't reach him in time. He just slipped. "Please hurry. There is so much blood." Less than a minute later, the heavy metal fire doors on the bottom landing flew open with a deafening crash. My mother and father burst into the stairwell. For a brief, fleeting, incredibly foolish second, a wave of relief washed over me. My parents were here. They would call a doctor. They would see what he did. They would help me. I was so incredibly wrong. My mother did not even glance at the blood pooling near my head. She didn't look at my twisted arm or my bruised face. She sprinted directly past me, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the concrete, and threw herself at Marcus. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, pulling his head to her shoulder. "Oh my God, Marcus, my sweet boy, you poor thing," she cried, kissing his cheek repeatedly as if he were the one bleeding on the floor. "You must have been so incredibly scared watching your brother fall like that. It is okay, sweetie. You are safe. Mom is here. Don't look at it. It will just traumatize you more." My father walked slowly down the steps. He stopped right next to my head. He did not kneel down to check my pulse. He did not ask where it hurt. He just stood there, towering over me, glaring down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disappointment. "Julian, what in the world were you thinking?" My father scolded, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "Running in a stairwell at your age? You know your brother has high blood pressure. You could have given him a severe panic attack with this reckless stunt. You are always causing unnecessary drama." I forced my eyes open, staring at the blurry outline of my father's shoes. I tried to speak. I tried to force the absolute truth out of my bleeding mouth. "I didn't fall," I whispered, the pain making my voice raspy, broken, and weak. "I didn't run. Marcus." He pushed me. He shoved me with both hands. "Don't you dare," Marcus interrupted instantly, burying his face deeper into our mother's shoulder. Fake, calculated tears streamed down his face. "I tried to save you, Julian. I almost fell down the stairs myself trying to grab your jacket. How can you lie about this after I tried to help you? Why do you always try to make me the bad guy?" My mother's face hardened into a mask of pure, venomous fury. She glared at me like I was a dangerous stranger off the street who had just insulted her family. "Stop it right now, Julian. Just shut your mouth. Your brother is traumatized enough without you making up malicious, jealous stories to ruin his reputation. You have always been clumsy, and now you are just being vindictive." Before I could even attempt to defend myself, the top stairwell door burst open again. A rapid response medical team rushed in, led by a tall, imposing woman in dark blue scrubs. Her name tag read Claire, head trauma nurse. She took one look at the scene and immediately went into professional mode. "What exactly happened here?" Claire demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She completely ignored my parents and immediately dropped to her knees beside me, gently stabilizing my neck and shining a bright penlight into my dilated eyes. "Our son had a clumsy accident," my father said smoothly, stepping directly in front of Marcus to shield him from the nurse's view. "He was running up the stairs, completely ignored the wet floor sign, and lost his footing. His older brother bravely tried to catch him but missed." Nurse Claire did not look up at my father. Her experienced eyes darted to the angle of my fall, the massive distance between the landing and my body, the position of my limbs, and then slowly up to the top landing where Marcus stood perfectly unharmed. She was a veteran of the emergency room. She had seen thousands of accidents. She knew exactly what a clumsy slip looked like, and she knew exactly what an intentional, forceful assault looked like. "Step back, sir," Claire ordered, her voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation or argument. "Do not crowd my patient. We need to stabilize his cervical spine immediately." As the EMTs expertly strapped me to a rigid backboard, a younger nurse hurried into the stairwell holding a glowing hospital tablet. She looked visibly panicked, her eyes wide. "Nurse Claire, you need to see this immediately. Hospital security just flagged the feed from this sector." "Not now," my mother snapped aggressively, waving her manicured hand dismissively at the young nurse. "We are dealing with a private family matter. In fact, we will be taking Julian to a private clinic in our network. I do not want him treated at this public facility. Have your people help him out to our car." Claire completely ignored my mother. She took the tablet from the young nurse. Her eyes scanned the screen for 5 intense seconds. I watched her jaw clench so hard a muscle ticked in her cheek. The air in the stairwell seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. She handed the tablet back to the young nurse and pulled out her shoulder radio. Security, this is Claire. Initiate a full lockdown on stairwell B and secure the perimeter immediately. I need the raw camera footage from the last 15 minutes sent directly to the police liaison's office, Claire said calmly, her eyes never leaving my parents. My father's face went completely pale, all his previous arrogance draining away. What footage? I demand you release my son to us right now. I will have my lawyer contact your hospital administration and sue you for unlawful detainment. Claire finally stood up to her full height and turned to look my father dead in the eye. Sir, every single stairwell in this hospital is monitored 24/7 by high-definition cameras for patient safety and liability. What I just witnessed on that security feed is not a clumsy accident. It is felony assault. This is no longer a family matter. And absolutely nobody is leaving this building until law enforcement arrives. I saw Marcus physically recoil against the wall. His perfect, smug facade began to violently crack. But the dark truth was, this brutal push was not an isolated incident. To understand how my own family could stand there, watch me bleed, and actively side with my attacker, you have to understand the deeply toxic foundation my entire life was built upon. Growing up in our household, there were two entirely distinct, separate realities. There was Marcus's world, a world of endless privilege and zero consequences. And then there was my world, a world of constant labor, invisible sacrifices, and perpetual blame. Marcus was the undeniable golden child. He was the firstborn son, the handsome high school athlete, the charismatic charmer who could talk his way out of a burning building with a smile. My parents worshipped the very ground he walked on. When Marcus turned 16, he demanded a car. Not just any car, but a brand new sports car. My parents quietly dipped deeply into their retirement savings to buy him a sleek, black Mustang. 2 days after getting it, Marcus backed it into a mailbox and scratched the entire passenger side. Instead of punishing him, my father handed me a bucket of soapy water and told me I needed to buff it out, blaming me for distracting Marcus when he was driving. Then there was me. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who always followed the rules, got straight A's, and never asked for a single thing. When I turned 16, I didn't get a car. I got a firm handshake from my father and a job application for the local grocery store. My parents told me it builds character and teaches financial responsibility. When it came time for me to go to college, I sat down with a bank teller to access the college fund my grandparents had supposedly set up for me. The account was completely empty. I confronted my parents, and they casually admitted they had drained my entire educational fund to pay for Marcus's lavish, $80,000 destination wedding in Hawaii. A wedding to a woman he had known for 6 months, which inevitably ended in a messy divorce exactly 8 months later. I was left to take out massive, crippling student loans and worked grueling night shifts stocking shelves just to keep my head above water. Our family Thanksgiving dinners were always a masterclass in psychological manipulation. I would spend 3 exhausting days prepping the kitchen, cooking the massive turkey, setting the fine china, and cleaning the entire house until it sparkled. When the extended family arrived, I was expected to fade into the background. My parents would stand up, clink their glasses, and make a grand toast to Marcus, praising him for simply showing up in a clean shirt. I was treated exactly like the hired help, expected to clear the dirty plates silently while they enthusiastically discussed Marcus's bright future in real estate. A career he had been trying to get off the ground for 5 long years while living completely rent-free in my parents' finished basement, contributing absolutely nothing to the household. But there was one person in our family who saw straight through the smoke and mirrors. Grandma Beatrice. Beatrice was my father's mother, and she was an absolute force of nature. She was a sharp, fiercely independent woman who had built a massive, highly lucrative real estate portfolio entirely from scratch after my grandfather passed away. She did not tolerate fools. She saw through manipulation instantly, and she certainly did not tolerate Marcus's disgusting sense of entitlement. A year ago, Grandma Beatrice was diagnosed with a severe heart condition that required immediate, high-risk open-heart surgery. The doctors brought our family into a conference room and explicitly told us she would need round-the-clock intensive care for at least 6 months during her difficult recovery. My parents immediately announced they simply could not do it. My father claimed his middle management job at the firm was far too demanding. My mother claimed she had too many vital HOA meetings and social club events to attend. And Marcus dramatically sighed, said hospitals depressed his creative energy, and booked a 3-week luxury vacation to Cancun to process his deep grief. So I stepped up. I didn't even hesitate. I packed my bags, broke the lease on my tiny apartment, and moved my entire life into Grandma Beatrice's historic Victorian home in the city's best district. For 6 months, I cooked her specific dietary meals, managed her incredibly complex medication schedule, drove her to endless, painful physical therapy appointments, bathed her when she was too weak to stand, and worked my remote corporate job from her kitchen table late into the quiet hours of the night. It was physically and emotionally exhausting, but I loved her deeply, and I simply did not want her to be alone in her most vulnerable time. During those quiet evenings, sitting by the warm fireplace while the snow fell outside, Grandma Beatrice and I talked about absolutely everything. She watched me meticulously balance my meager monthly salary to pay off my student loans while simultaneously helping her manage her multi-million-dollar estate paperwork. She saw the stark, undeniable contrast between how I treated her with genuine love and how the rest of the family treated her like an inconvenient ATM. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, she asked me to drive her to her attorney's office downtown. She didn't tell me why. She just cryptically said she had some important paperwork to finalize and update. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, completely oblivious. 3 months later, Marcus came over to Grandma's house completely unannounced. He was supposedly there to check on her, but within 5 minutes of arriving, I heard the distinct sound of drawers opening and closing in her private home office. I was in the kitchen preparing a fresh batch of soup for lunch when I heard a loud, violent crash. I dropped the knife I was holding and ran into the office to find Marcus standing aggressively over Grandma's forcibly opened filing cabinet. His face was a deep, mottled purple with absolute rage. The veins in his neck were bulging. In his trembling hands, he tightly held a thick legal document. It was a certified copy of Grandma Beatrice's updated will and living trust. "What the hell is this, Julian?" Marcus screamed, waving the heavy paper violently in my face. "She is leaving the house to you? The historic property? The entire stock portfolio? The liquid assets? Everything?" I was genuinely shocked. My jaw dropped. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Marcus. Put that document back right now. It is private and you have no right to be in here. Do not play dumb with me, you manipulative little snake," he roared, stepping menacingly into my personal space. He shoved me hard against the heavy oak bookshelf, knocking the wind out of my lungs. "You planned this from the very beginning. You moved in here, played the devoted, pathetic little nurse, and manipulated a sick, confused old woman into changing her inheritance. That money belongs to me. I am the firstborn son. It is my birthright." Suddenly, Grandma Beatrice appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on her wooden cane. Her eyes blazed with a terrifying, righteous fury I had never seen before in my life. "Put my private papers down and get out of my house this instant, Marcus," she commanded, her voice shaking the very walls of the room. "Julian didn't manipulate anything. I changed my will on my own accord because he is the only person in this entire family with an ounce of integrity and compassion. You are a greedy, lazy, entitled parasite, and if you ever lay a hand on your brother again in my house, I will make sure you don't even get a single dime from your father's estate either." Marcus dropped the papers as if they burned his hands. He glared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It wasn't just sibling anger. It was a dark, chilling promise of violence. "This is not over, Julian. Not by a long shot," he hissed, before storming past us and slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. That specific moment was the triggering event. That was the exact moment my life became a daily, terrifying hazard. Over the next few months, strange, dangerous things started happening whenever my family was around. The very first incident happened at a family summer barbecue. I was standing near the edge of the elevated concrete patio, holding a heavy glass tray of drinks. Marcus supposedly tripped over a stationary lawn chair and slammed his heavy shoulder directly into my chest, sending me flying backward off the concrete patio and crashing violently into the thorny rose bushes below. My arms and face were cut up pretty badly, bleeding through my shirt. My parents just laughed it off, handing Marcus a beer and saying boys will be boys, telling me to stop being so dramatic. A month later, at the grocery store, a heavy wooden pallet stacked high with industrial canned goods mysteriously toppled over in the aisle right exactly where I was standing. Marcus was the only other person in the aisle with me. He claimed the wheels on the pallet were broken and it just shifted. I barely managed to jump out of the way before my leg was crushed. Then came the water fountain incident near Grandma's hospital room during a routine checkup. The floor was perfectly dry. As I leaned down to get a quick drink, Marcus walked directly behind me, and his foot somehow hooked aggressively behind my ankle. I fell forward, smashing my chin violently against the hard porcelain basin. Blood poured down my neck, requiring 6 deep stitches. My mother berated me the entire time in the waiting room for ruining her afternoon shopping schedule with my relentless clumsiness. They were all small, seemingly deniable incidents, always executed with witnesses present, always with my parents nearby to instantly dismiss my claims, comfort Marcus's theatrical distress, and label me to everyone around us as an uncoordinated, paranoid liability. I started flinching whenever Marcus entered a room. I was living in a constant, exhausting state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning my environment, waiting for the next accident. And then came today, the hospital stairwell, the moment he finally decided that small accidents and stitches were simply not enough. He needed to remove the obstacle to his wealth permanently. The emergency room was a chaotic, dizzying blur of harsh fluorescent lights, frantic shouting, and the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors. I was lying flat on a stiff gurney in Trauma Bay 3, my chest tightly wrapped in thick bandages, and 4-line dripping heavy painkillers directly into my left arm. The rapid x-rays had just confirmed the brutal reality of the push. 3 severely broken ribs, a deep hairline fracture in my right collarbone, and a severely sprained wrist that throbbed with every heartbeat. Through the thin, blue privacy curtain, I could clearly hear the escalating, vicious argument happening out in the hallway. My parents were absolutely furious, their entitled voices echoing loudly off the sterile white walls. "This is completely outrageous and unacceptable," my father yelled, violently slamming his heavy hand against a metal medical cart. "I am a respected corporate executive in this community. We are not allowing our son to be locked in a room and interrogated like a common street thug. I demand you process the discharge papers for Julian immediately. We have a private concierge physician who will handle his care in the comfort of our own home." Your son pushed his brother down a concrete flight of stairs with enough force to break bones, Nurse Claire replied, her voice dangerously calm, steady, and unyielding. "The local police department has already been dispatched. We are treating this as a crime scene. Absolutely nobody is leaving this floor until official statements are taken by law enforcement." "It was a complete misunderstanding," my mother shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical, grating pitch. "Family matters should always be handled within the family. Julian has always been incredibly clumsy. He trips over his own feet constantly. He is practically uncoordinated. Marcus just tried to grab him to stop the fall." The privacy curtain was yanked back abruptly, the metal rings screeching against the rod. Dr. Lin, the hospital's senior attending trauma surgeon, stepped firmly into my bay, followed closely by Nurse Claire. They completely ignored the screaming match going on outside and focused their intense professional attention entirely on me. Dr. Lin pulled up a small rolling stool beside my bed. His expression was incredibly grim and serious. "Julian, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Look at me. Are you currently in a safe environment at home? Are you in fear for your life outside of this building? I stared down at my heavily bruised hands, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's ultimate betrayal pressing down on my broken chest harder than the physical injuries. I live with my grandmother right now, I murmured, my voice shaking slightly. Nurse Claire stepped forward, holding her glowing iPad tightly to her chest. She looked at Dr. Lin, who gave a brief, decisive nod. Julian, Claire said softly, but with a laser-like focus that demanded my full attention. While you were down in radiology getting your x-rays, our risk management and legal team pulled your entire medical history. We noticed a very distinct, highly disturbing pattern. We went back and reviewed the archive security footage from your previous visits to this hospital with your grandmother. My heart began to hammer violently against my broken ribs, sending sharp spikes of pain through my torso. 3 months ago, you required 6 stitches on your chin by the water fountain on the 4th floor cardiology wing, Claire continued, reading directly from the glowing screen. 2 months before that, you were treated in this very ER for a severely sprained ankle from a fall in the parking garage. Last month, a mild concussion near the main cafeteria. We pulled the high-definition archival tape for every single one of those so-called incidents. The silence in the trauma bay was absolutely deafening. Even the machines seemed to quiet down, waiting for the verdict. What exactly did you see? I asked, my voice barely a cracked whisper, though deep down, I already knew the answer. We saw your brother, Dr. Lin said firmly, his voice filled with righteous anger. We saw him intentionally stick his foot out at the fountain. We saw him aggressively shove you from behind in the parking garage. We have exactly 6 documented, crystal-clear recorded accidents on hospital property in the past calendar year alone. And in every single one of them, Marcus is the instigator. He is the aggressor. And your parents are standing right there, watching it happen in real time, and actively looking the other way. The remaining breath completely left my lungs. A cold, suffocating, paralyzing wave of realization washed over every nerve in my body. I always knew my parents heavily favored Marcus. I knew they enabled his bad behavior and cleaned up his financial messes. But to hear a highly trained medical professional confirm that they had stood there, watched him systematically abuse me, intentionally injure me, and then actively covered it up to protect his image, it broke something fundamental and deep inside my soul. They didn't just love him more. They viewed me as entirely disposable. I was nothing but acceptable collateral damage in their desperate, pathetic mission to protect their golden child. The curtain flew open again with violent force. My father stormed into the room, his face bright red with indignation, Marcus cowering cowardly right behind his broad shoulders. We are leaving. Right now, my father barked, pointing a thick, aggressive finger directly at Dr. Lin's chest. I am calling my lawyer immediately. You people are facing a massive medical malpractice lawsuit for holding my family hostage against our will. Dr. Lin did not even blink. He slowly stood up, towering over my father with the quiet authority of a man who saves lives for a living. You are not in charge here, sir. You have zero authority in this room. Julian is an adult. He is the patient, and as licensed medical professionals, we are legally mandated reporters. This violent cycle of abuse stops today, right here in this room. My mother aggressively pushed past my father, rushing directly to my bedside. She grabbed my uninjured left hand, digging her expensive manicured nails painfully into my skin. Her eyes were wide and pleading, but there was a vicious, undeniable threat lingering right beneath her sweet, maternal tone. Julian, please listen to me, she whispered frantically, her breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. Tell them it was a huge mistake. Tell them you just tripped on your shoelaces. If they arrest Marcus, it will completely ruin his life. He won't be able to get his real estate license. He will lose everything. You know, he didn't mean to hurt you this badly. He just gets a little hot-headed. Please, Julian, for the sake of our family, be the bigger person and do the right thing. I looked closely at my mother. I looked deep into the eyes of the woman who had birthed me, who was actively begging me to swallow my trauma, ignore my shattered bones, and sacrifice my own legal justice just to keep her favorite son out of a jail cell. I looked past her to Marcus, who was glaring at me from the doorway, silently daring me to cross him, still believing he held all the power. For 24 years, I had kept my mouth firmly shut. I had taken the blame for the scratched cars, the ruined dinners, the empty college funds. I had absorbed the pain to keep their twisted version of peace. I gripped the cold metal railing of the hospital bed until my knuckles turned stark white. A fire ignited deep in my chest, burning away decades of fear, submission, and desperate longing for their approval. I yanked my hand violently out of my mother's painful grasp. "No," I said, my voice ringing out clear, strong, and unwavering across the trauma bay. My mother gasped loudly, stepping back as if I had physically struck her across the face. "Julian, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "I am completely done," I said, looking directly into my father's shocked eyes, then shifting my gaze to Marcus's terrified face. "I am done protecting him. I am done being your designated punching bag." He didn't slip. He pushed me. He actively tried to kill me so he could steal Grandma's inheritance. I turned my head to Nurse Claire and Dr. Lin, the only two people who had ever truly advocated for me. "Call the police. Give them absolutely everything you have. Every tape, every medical record, every incident report. I want to press full criminal charges." "You little ungrateful bastard," Marcus snarled, losing his victim facade instantly and lunging forward into the room with his fists raised. Before he could take 2 steps toward my bed, Dr. Lin shoved him back incredibly hard against the metal doorframe. Simultaneously, a heavy-set, no-nonsense hospital security guard stepped firmly into the room, placing his hand threateningly on his utility belt. "Back up right now, son, or I will put you on the floor," the guard warned, his voice a low rumble. My father grabbed Marcus roughly by the arm, yanking him back into the hallway. His eyes darted nervously around the room, realizing with mounting panic that they were rapidly losing complete control of the narrative. "Don't say another word, Marcus. Not another single word." He glared back at me, his face twisted in pure hatred. "You are dead to us, Julian. Do you hear me? You are completely destroying this family over a petty, jealous grudge. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable life." "The only thing I regret," I replied coldly, staring right through him, "is not doing this years ago." Exactly 10 minutes later, Detective Vargas confidently walked into Trauma Bay 3. She was a seasoned, tough-as-nails investigator with sharp, calculating eyes, a neat bun, and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded respect. She carried a thick leather notepad and a digital voice recorder. She had already firmly asked my parents and Marcus to wait in a separate, isolated holding area near the cafeteria under strict security supervision, completely ignoring their loud, obnoxious protests about illegal detainment, civil rights violations, and threats to call the mayor. Once the room was fully cleared of my toxic family, she pulled up a chair and sat down right beside my bed. "All right, Julian," Detective Vargas said, clicking her pen and placing the recorder on the tray table. "I know you are in a lot of pain, but I need you to walk me through exactly what happened on that stairwell, from the moment you entered until the moment the medical team arrived." I took a deep, painful breath and told her absolutely everything. I told her about the tense confrontation on the landing, the exact cruel words Marcus used to belittle me, the specific angle and force of the push against my shoulders, and the sickeningly fake phone call he made to my parents while I was bleeding profusely on the concrete. I didn't stop there. I also detailed Grandma Beatrice's situation, the recently changed inheritance and trust, the massive real estate portfolio at stake, and the escalating, dangerous accidents over the past few months that the hospital had just confirmed on tape. Vargas took meticulous, rapid notes, her expression remaining perfectly neutral and unreadable. "Inheritance disputes and trust fund jealousy are incredibly common motives for severe domestic violence," she noted quietly, tapping her pen against the pad. "But I have to be honest with you, Julian. Proving criminal intent in a fall is notoriously difficult in a court of law. A good, Expensive defense attorney will argue it was just a sibling scuffle that unfortunately got out of hand. We have the video of the push, which absolutely guarantees a felony assault charge, but getting a district attorney to bite on premeditated attempted murder is a massive legal leap. As if on exact cue, a sharp-dressed man wearing a custom Italian suit and carrying a sleek leather briefcase strode aggressively past the security guard and straight into my bay. It was Arthur Thorne, a highly aggressive, notoriously ruthless corporate defense lawyer my father kept on permanent retainer for his business dealings. Thorne was famous in our city for relentlessly bullying witnesses and burying opponents in endless mountains of legal paperwork. "Detective Vargas," Thorne said smoothly, oozing fake charm as he handed her a thick, embossed business card. "I formally represent Marcus and his parents. My clients are currently exercising their Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and we are formally demanding that Marcus be released from this facility immediately. There is zero credible physical evidence of a severe crime here, only the rambling, incoherent accusations of an estranged sibling with a highly documented history of severe mental instability." I felt my heart drop like a stone into my stomach. Mental instability? Thorne turned his predatory, dead gaze directly to me. "My client's brother, Julian, has been under immense, crushing stress acting as a full-time caregiver for an elderly dementia patient. We are fully prepared to bring in highly paid medical experts to testify that he is suffering from severe paranoia, delusions, and extreme caregiver burnout." He lunged aggressively at my client in a manic state on that stairwell, lost his footing in his frenzy, and fell. Marcus heroically tried to catch him but failed. "This is a tragic accident, not a crime." Vargas crossed her arms, unimpressed by the theatrical display. "We have high-definition hospital security footage of the explicit push, Mr. Thorne. It doesn't look like a rescue attempt." Thorne smiled, a cold, reptilian stretch of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Video without audio is entirely subjective, detective. You know that. The footage will simply show a chaotic struggle. It will show my client desperately defending himself against a paranoid, violent attack. If you arrest my client on this incredibly flimsy evidence, I will have the charges entirely dropped by a judge by tomorrow morning, and I will personally file a massive, multi-million-dollar defamation and civil rights lawsuit against this hospital, your precinct, and this young man." The small room grew incredibly tense. The air felt thick. Thorne was expertly manipulating the legal system right in front of my eyes, twisting reality to make the victim look like the deranged aggressor. My parents had brought in the absolute heaviest artillery to crush me into silence. Just as Vargas was about to sharply respond, a young man wearing a hospital security uniform jogged urgently into the room. It was Owen, the hospital's lead IT and security technician. He looked slightly out of breath, his hair messy, but he had a triumphant, undeniable gleam in his eye. He was gripping a small, silver USB drive tightly in his hand. "Excuse me, detective?" Owen interrupted, completely ignoring the glaring, million-dollar lawyer standing in his way. "Nurse Claire asked me to pull the raw data files from the stairwell B camera. She said it was a code-red urgent priority." "We already have the video file, son," Vargas said gently, holding up her hand. "Yes, ma'am, I know," Owen replied rapidly, practically vibrating with adrenaline as he plugged the USB drive into Claire's hospital tablet sitting on the desk. "But you see, Stairwell B is an old emergency exit. Last month, administration upgraded the entire security system to include high-definition environmental audio recording to strictly monitor for fire alarms and distress calls. The primary video feed didn't have the audio synced properly on the main dashboard. I just spent the last 20 minutes running the raw file through our audio extraction software in the basement to isolate the voices from the background echo." Lawyer Thorne's smug, arrogant smile instantly vanished from his face. He took a quick step forward, his hand reaching out. "I object to this entirely. This is an illegal wiretap in a private medical facility. This cannot be admissible. A public hospital stairwell has absolutely zero reasonable expectation of privacy. Counselor?" Vargas snapped back fiercely, swatting his hand away and not taking her eyes off the tablet screen. "Play the audio, Owen. Now." Owen tapped the play button on the screen. The tinny, electronic hiss of the concrete stairwell filled the silent trauma bay. And then, clear as absolute day, Marcus's voice echoed loudly from the small speakers. But it wasn't the conversation we had right before the push. It was a phone call he had made exactly 10 minutes prior, pacing the top landing alone while waiting for me to walk up the stairs. "I don't care what Dad says." Marcus's recorded voice snarled aggressively through the tablet, dripping with venom. "I am not letting that little rat take the house. It's prime historic real estate. It's worth over $1 million. If the old bat dies and he gets control of the trust, I am totally screwed. No, listen to me. One more accident should do it permanently. I'm going to push him down the concrete flight in stairwell B. It's a completely blind corner. I'll just say he tripped and I tried to catch him. With his injuries, he will either give up the claim out of fear or be too brain damaged to fight me in probate court. I'm taking care of the obstacle right now. Just have the lawyer ready." The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. The air was completely sucked out of the room. Lawyer Thorne stared blankly at the tablet, his face completely drained of all color, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He slowly reached down and closed the golden clasps of his expensive leather briefcase with a quiet click. He was a shark, and he knew exactly what a sinking ship looked like. Detective Vargas stood up slowly, her chair scraping loudly and sharply against the linoleum floor. She looked at Thorne, a grim, victorious smile playing on her lips. "Subjective video, Mr. Thorne? Severe paranoia? Your client just explicitly confessed to premeditated attempted murder on a crystal-clear audio tape. He established a financial motive, the physical method, and the lethal intent." Thorne didn't say a single word. He didn't try to argue. He just nodded tightly, turned around on his expensive heels, and walked straight out of the trauma bay, completely abandoning my family to their inevitable fate. Vargas slowly unclipped the heavy steel handcuffs from her duty belt. They clinked together with a sound that felt like absolute freedom to my ears. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with a fierce, undeniable respect. "Hang tight, Julian. The storm is about to hit the hallway." I lay back heavily against the hospital pillows, the agonizing, sharp pain in my broken ribs suddenly feeling a whole lot lighter. I thought the worst was finally over. I thought the audio recording was the ultimate weapon that would end this nightmare once and for all. I was so incredibly wrong. The real bomb was about to be dropped, and it wasn't going to come from the police or the doctors. It was going to come from the one person my parents feared more than anyone else in the world, and she was already on her way down the hall. The hallway directly outside Trauma Bay 3 was eerily, suffocatingly quiet for exactly 2 excruciating minutes after Arthur Thorne, the high-priced, heavily compensated corporate lawyer, practically sprinted out of the hospital. He had bolted out of those double doors so incredibly fast that he nearly knocked over a medical cart, leaving a trail of expensive cologne and shattered legal strategies in his wake. My parents, however, were still completely sequestered in the small, windowless holding area near the sterile cafeteria, aggressively guarded by hospital security. They were completely and blissfully oblivious to the catastrophic reality that their golden child had just explicitly confessed to premeditated attempted murder on a crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording. In their twisted, incredibly privileged minds, they were likely sitting on those uncomfortable plastic hospital chairs, sipping their awful, bitter vending machine coffee, and smugly believing that Arthur Thorne was in this room, actively bullying Detective Vargas into dropping all the charges. They truly thought their immense wealth, their pristine country club status, and their carefully curated, artificially flawless public image were going to swoop in and save them from the consequences of their actions, just like it always had. They had spent their entire lives treating the legal system and the people around them like obstacles they could simply throw a massive salary or a threatening lawsuit at to make them disappear. They had absolutely no idea that the real, unyielding reckoning was currently rolling down the corridor, and it possessed a power they could not buy off. I heard her approach before I actually saw her. It started with the steady, rhythmic, undeniable squeak of a heavy-duty hospital wheelchair cutting sharply through the sterile, tense silence of the emergency department. Then, I heard the heavy, authoritative, synchronized footsteps of several hospital administrators and security personnel trailing closely behind it, like a royal guard escorting a monarch into battle. Nurse Claire, who had been standing protectively near my bed, reached out and pulled back the heavy blue privacy curtain just as the wheelchair rounded the sharp corner of the hallway. Sitting there, dressed in a standard issue, faded hospital gown but looking like an absolute, untouchable queen commanding a throne, was Grandma Beatrice. Despite her recent, incredibly invasive open-heart surgery, her posture was perfectly rigid, her spine straight as an iron rod. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back without a single strand out of place, and her sharp, piercing blue eyes were blazing with a cold, meticulously calculated fury that could instantly freeze boiling water. She was flanked on her left by Dr. Lin, and on her right by a man I did not immediately recognize. He was a tall, incredibly imposing man in a tailored charcoal suit, clutching a massive, thick black leather binder to his chest like a shield. "Julian," Grandma Beatrice said, her voice slightly raspy from the intubation tube she had endured just weeks prior, but carrying an undeniable, heavy weight that instantly commanded every single ounce of attention in the entire trauma bay. She looked closely at my heavily bandaged chest, my severely bruised and swollen face, and my completely immobilized, shattered right arm. A brief, incredibly painful flicker of deep, profound sorrow crossed her sharp eyes for a fraction of a second. I saw her jaw clench tightly, a mother and a grandmother processing the violent abuse of her bloodline. But that sorrow was instantly replaced by absolute, unyielding, terrifying resolve. "I specifically told you I would protect you. I promised you that you would be safe in my home. I am so profoundly sorry it came to this brutal escalation." Before I could even formulate a proper response, before I could push past the heavy haze of intravenous painkillers to thank her for coming down here, the heavy double doors at the far end of the hallway burst open with a loud, metallic crash. My parents, having somehow arrogantly convinced a younger, inexperienced security guard that they had a legal right to exit the holding area, marched aggressively down the corridor toward my bay. Marcus was walking right behind them, practically hiding in their shadow. His chest was puffed out defensively, and he was actually still wearing that arrogant, untouchable smirk, completely oblivious to the legal nuclear bomb that had just been dropped on his entire existence. "Julian, this ridiculous, attention-seeking farce has gone on long enough," my father boomed, his expensive leather dress shoes clicking aggressively and loudly against the polished linoleum floor. He didn't even notice Grandma Beatrice yet. His entire, laser-focused attention was set on intimidating me into terrified silence. "We just tried calling Arthur Thorne's cell phone, and his incompetent secretary said he had to step away for an absolute emergency. Whatever malicious lies you just told him, whatever ridiculous lawsuit you are threatening, it does not matter. We are leaving this filthy public facility right now, and you are going to call the district attorney first thing tomorrow morning and formally, legally retract your statement. If you don't do exactly as I say, I will personally see to it that you never get a decent job, a promotion, or a single shred of respect in this entire city again. Do you understand me? Are you quite finished humiliating yourself, Richard?" The voice cracked through the chaotic hallway like a physical, leather whip. My father froze mid-step, his expensive shoe hovering above the floor. His arrogant, broad-shouldered posture instantly deflated as if someone had just punctured his lungs. He slowly, agonizingly turned his head, his eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror as he finally saw his mother sitting in the wheelchair, completely blocking the entrance to my trauma bay like an impenetrable fortress. "Mother?" my father stammered, his face rapidly draining of all its color, turning a sickly, pale shade of gray. What in God's name are you doing down here in the emergency ward? You are supposed to be resting in the cardiology wing on the 4th floor. Your heart condition, the stress." "My heart is perfectly, functionally fine, Richard. It is my soul that is sick to its absolute stomach looking at you right now," Grandma Beatrice stated, her voice echoing powerfully down the long corridor. Every single nurse, doctor, and security guard in the immediate vicinity stopped whatever they were doing. Clipboards were lowered, Monitors were ignored. The entire emergency room became a captive audience to the spectacular destruction of my family's toxic empire. My mother, desperately trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation, quickly tried to play the role of the sweet, diplomatic peacemaker. She plastered on a fake, incredibly strained, overly sweet smile that looked more like a painful grimace. She took a tentative step forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Beatrice, please, darling, you really shouldn't be out of bed. This environment is terrible for your recovery." My mother cooed, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "Julian just had a very clumsy, unfortunate fall on the stairs. You know how completely uncoordinated and careless he is. We are always telling him to watch his step." Marcus bravely tried to catch him, he really did, but Julian is just confused and upset right now. He hit his head pretty hard. "It is just a private family matter. We are handling it, just like we always do." Grandma Beatrice did not speak for a long, agonizing moment. She simply looked at my mother with such intense, unfiltered, absolute disgust that my mother physically flinched and took a step backward, nearly tripping over her own expensive heels. "A private family matter?" Beatrice repeated softly, almost dangerously, before her voice rose to a booming, terrifying crescendo that shook the room. "You stand there, covered in the expensive diamond jewelry paid for entirely by my late husband's company, clutching a purse that costs more than Julian's annual salary, and you explicitly lie directly to my face? You think I am some frail, senile old fool you can just easily manipulate? You think I don't know exactly what you three disgusting parasites have been doing behind my back for the last 2 decades? Marcus scoffed loudly from behind my father, crossing his arms aggressively and violently rolling his eyes. He still didn't get it. He still thought he was invincible. "Grandma, calm down. You are being hysterical. Julian is just playing the pathetic victim again to get your attention and manipulate you into giving him more of your money. He is manipulating you just like he manipulates everyone else. He is completely crazy." Grandma Beatrice didn't yell at Marcus. She didn't argue with him. She didn't even dignify his existence with a direct look. She simply raised her frail right hand into the air and loudly snapped her fingers. The tall, imposing man in the tailored charcoal suit immediately stepped forward out of the shadows. He opened the massive, thick black leather binder he was carrying, the sound of the metal rings clicking loudly in the silent room. "Richard, Susan, Marcus," Beatrice said, her tone suddenly, drastically shifting from an angry grandmother to that of a ruthless, cold-blooded corporate executive conducting a hostile, aggressive company takeover. "I would like to formally introduce you to Mr. Vance. He is a senior forensic accountant, a former federal prosecutor, and an incredibly thorough private investigator. I quietly hired his firm exactly 10 months ago." The remaining color completely vanished from my parents' faces. They looked like they were staring directly at a firing squad. "10 months ago?" my father whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Yes, Richard. Exactly 10 months. Beatrice confirmed coldly, her eyes locking onto his. "Right around the exact same time I noticed Julian constantly showing up to my house to cook my meals, clean my floors, and organize my medications while sporting unexplained bruises, suspicious cuts, and a perpetual look of absolute terror in his eyes. Right around the time Marcus suddenly started taking luxury, first-class vacations to Mexico and Europe while constantly crying poverty and claiming he was completely broke. I am not blind, Richard. I have never been blind. I knew you always favored Marcus, but I had absolutely no idea the terrifying depths of your absolute moral bankruptcy until Mr. Vance started bringing me his meticulously detailed weekly reports." Mr. Vance adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began to read directly from the massive binder in a clear, loud, authoritative voice that carried down the entire hallway. "Over the past 10 continuous months, our investigative firm has fully documented and legally recorded 3 separate, highly destructive instances of Marcus intentionally destroying Julian's personal property, including slashing his vehicle's tires and destroying his work laptop. Furthermore, We have successfully subpoenaed restricted bank records definitively proving that Richard and Susan actively, intentionally drained a federally protected college fund, originally set up by Beatrice for Julian, in order to fund Marcus's lavish destination wedding, a marriage that ended in a highly publicized divorce just 8 months later. Finally, and most importantly, we have successfully obtained private, timestamp security footage from the local grocery store, the country club patio, and this very hospital's parking garage. This footage explicitly shows Marcus intentionally causing severe physical harm to Julian on 4 separate, distinct occasions, with both Richard and Susan physically present, watching the assaults occur, and actively concealing the crimes. My mother's legs gave out entirely. She let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp and literally collapsed heavily against the cold hallway wall, sliding down until she hit the linoleum floor. She was clutching her chest, desperately gasping for air as if she were the one with shattered ribs. "Mother, please, I am begging you. This is all a massive, terrible misunderstanding." My father pleaded, genuine tears finally welling in his eyes. But he wasn't crying out of guilt for what he had done to me. He was crying out of sheer, unadulterated terror for his own bank accounts. "We were just trying to protect Marcus. He has a difficult temper. Yes, he gets stressed easily, but a lawsuit or a police investigation would completely ruin his life. You can't possibly do this to your own blood. We are your family. You made your ultimate choice about family and blood when you stood there and watched Julian bleed on that concrete, and then aggressively told him to shut his mouth to protect a violent criminal." Beatrice fired back, her voice shaking with righteous rage. "You thought you were so incredibly clever. You thought you could just wait patiently for me to die, bully Julian into giving up his rightful inheritance, use your expensive lawyers to manipulate probate court, and walk away with my entire real estate empire. You thought I was just an obstacle." She turned her head slightly to Mr. Vance. "Give them the final documents." Mr. Vance reached into the back pocket of the binder, pulled out 3 thick, heavy manila envelopes, and methodically handed one to my father, one to my weeping mother on the floor, and one to a completely paralyzed Marcus. What is this?" Marcus demanded, his hands shaking violently as he clumsily ripped open the sealed flap of the envelope, pulling out a massive stack of heavily notarized legal papers. "That," Grandma Beatrice said, a slow, incredibly satisfying, cold smile spreading across her weathered face, "is your brand new, permanent reality. As of exactly 9 o'clock this morning," Beatrice continued, her voice echoing with absolute, devastating finality, "my team of attorneys officially finalized the most important paperwork of my entire life. My entire estate, every single liquid asset, all the historic properties, the entire massive stock portfolio, the corporate holding company, and every last dime I possess have been permanently and legally transferred into an irrevocable trust." My father physically dropped the heavy envelope. The thick stack of papers scattered chaotically across the sterile linoleum floor. Even without reading the fine print, my father, a corporate executive, knew exactly what that meant. An irrevocable trust meant it could absolutely never be changed, never be contested by disgruntled family members, and could never, under any circumstances, be touched by a probate court. The money was completely locked away, safe behind an impenetrable legal wall. The sole, exclusive beneficiary and executor of that trust, Beatrice declared, her eyes shifting to look at me with profound pride, is Julian. Furthermore, I have officially, legally severed all financial and corporate ties with you, Richard. The beautiful suburban house you currently live in, the one you love showing off to your country club friends, it is entirely owned by my holding company. I just signed the eviction notice. You have exactly 30 days to completely vacate the premises. Your exorbitant monthly allowance has been permanently terminated. Your corporate credit cards have been canceled. Your lucrative position on my board of directors is dissolved. You are completely, utterly, and legally cut off from all of it." Marcus stared blankly at the dense legal documents in his trembling hands, his eyes wide with a frantic, wild, animalistic panic. The devastating realization that he was suddenly entirely penniless, utterly homeless, and facing severe felony charges hit his privileged brain like a runaway freight train. "You can't do this to me," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking violently as he crumpled the legal papers in his fists and lunged aggressively toward Grandma's wheelchair. "That money is mine. I am the firstborn grandson. It belongs to me. You are a crazy old bat, and I will sue you for everything you have." Before he could even close half the distance to the wheelchair, Detective Vargas stepped smoothly out from the dark shadows of the adjacent trauma bay, flanked tightly by two massive, fully uniformed police officers. "Marcus?" Detective Vargas said, her voice cutting sharply through his hysterical, greedy tantrum. "Turn around immediately and place your hands firmly behind your back." Marcus froze entirely in his tracks. He looked frantically at the heavily armed officers, then whipped his head around to look at my parents. "Mom, Dad, do something. Call Arthur Thorne. Tell them it's a huge mistake. They can't arrest me. I didn't do anything wrong. Arthur Thorne formally and legally withdrew as your legal counsel exactly 15 minutes ago," Vargas stated bluntly, grabbing Marcus roughly by his expensive jacket shoulder and forcefully spinning him around. "He heard the high-definition audio recording of you actively planning to brutally murder your brother on the stairwell. He doesn't represent massive liabilities who confess on tape." "Audio recording?" my mother whispered, her voice completely hollow, sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. She looked up at Detective Vargas from her pathetic position on the floor, her eyes wide and terrified. What audio recording? Julian didn't have his phone." Detective Vargas didn't even flinch. She looked right through my mother with the kind of absolute, chilling disdain reserved only for the lowest, most despicable members of society. "Hospital security upgraded their environmental monitoring systems last month. Stairwell B has high-definition audio recording specifically designed to pick up distress calls. We have your precious son on tape, exactly 10 minutes before the violent assault, detailing his explicit plan to push Julian down the concrete stairs in order to severely injure him and force him to forfeit his inheritance. He literally laid out the entire motive, the method, and the intent. It is a textbook, airtight confession to premeditated attempted murder." My father stumbled backward as if he had been physically punched repeatedly in the gut by a heavyweight boxer. He looked at Marcus, who was now weeping hysterically, large, ugly tears streaming down his face as the officers aggressively patted him down and kicked his legs apart. The absolute golden child, the supposedly perfect son, the untouchable prince of the family, was sobbing uncontrollably like a broken, terrified child. His incredibly expensive designer jacket wrinkled and ruined under the firm grip of law enforcement. "Mom, please, Dad," Marcus wailed loudly, struggling pathetically against the officer's iron grip as the cold steel handcuffs clicked violently around his wrists. "I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean it. I was just angry. I wouldn't have actually killed him. I just wanted to scare him. You have to help me. They are going to put me in jail." My mother desperately scrambled to her feet and took a frantic step toward him, her twisted maternal instincts momentarily overriding her profound shock. But my father abruptly reached out and grabbed her arm, yanking her back so violently she almost fell over again. Survival instinct, raw and incredibly selfish, had finally kicked in. Richard realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that associating with Marcus in any capacity right now meant actively going down with the sinking ship. "Richard, let me go. They are taking our boy," my mother cried out, struggling weakly against his tight grip. "We have to call someone." "Shut your mouth, Susan," my father hissed vehemently, his voice trembling with a coward's absolute panic. "Do you not understand what is happening right now? He is on a police tape explicitly planning a murder. If we interfere, if we say a single word to defend him, they will charge us as active accessories before the fact. We have to distance ourselves from him right this second to save ourselves." I watched this horrific, pathetic display unfold from the sterile confines of my hospital bed, the heavy intravenous painkillers making the scene feel slightly surreal and floaty. Yet the emotional clarity I possessed in that exact moment was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. This was my family. This was the unit I had spent 24 years desperately trying to please. The very second the protective, impenetrable bubble of immense money and deniability popped, they turned on each other like starving, rabid wolves. My father was perfectly, easily willing to throw his favorite, beloved son directly to the wolves in order to save his own skin and reputation. Detective Vargas loudly read Marcus his Miranda rights, her voice a steady, rhythmic, unstoppable drumbeat of his impending doom. As the two massive officers began to drag him down the long hallway toward the freight elevator to transport him to holding, Marcus stopped struggling for a fraction of a second and locked his terrified eyes directly with mine. Gone was the immense arrogance. Gone was the smug, untouchable superiority. In his wide, panicked eyes, I saw nothing but raw, unadulterated, absolute terror. He opened his mouth to say something. Maybe to finally apologize, maybe to beg for mercy, or maybe to hurl one last, venomous insult, but I simply didn't care to hear it. I slowly reached up with my good, uninjured left hand, grabbed the edge of the blue privacy curtain, and pulled it completely shut with a sharp swish, cutting him off from my view forever. The sound of the heavy steel doors slamming shut at the end of the hall signaled the end of his reign of terror. The heavy, oppressive silence slowly returned to the trauma bay, save for the steady, reassuring, rhythmic beep of my heart monitor. I could still hear my parents standing just outside the curtain in the hallway, their heavy, frantic, panicked breathing echoing in the quiet space like trapped animals. Slowly, tentatively, the curtain was pushed aside an inch. My father stepped carefully into the room, followed closely by my visibly shaking mother. They looked completely and utterly destroyed. Their perfect, wealthy, untouchable country club facade had been violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces in less than 10 minutes. They were facing immediate eviction, absolute social ruin, complete financial bankruptcy, and the devastating realization that the son they had actively despised and abused for over 2 decades now held every single one of the cards. My father approached the side of my hospital bed. He actually took his expensive, tailored suit jacket off and draped it submissively over a plastic chair. A clear, subconscious psychological attempt to look physically smaller, more humble, and less threatening. Julian, my father started, his voice cracking pathetically. He tried to force a warm, loving, paternal smile, but it looked incredibly grotesque and unnatural on his panicked face. Son, your mother and we have made some absolutely terrible mistakes over the years. We were completely blinded. Marcus manipulated us, Julian, just like he manipulated and abused you. He lied to us. We were victims of his toxic, aggressive behavior too. You have to believe us. I stared at him, my expression completely, terrifyingly blank. I felt absolutely nothing. No burning anger, no overwhelming sadness, no desperate desire for aggressive revenge. Just a profound, liberating, absolute emptiness. My mother rushed forward, fresh tears streaming rapidly down her carefully made-up face, completely ruining her expensive mascara and leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Julian, my sweet, beautiful boy, please listen to us. You have to understand, being a parent is so incredibly difficult. We just wanted to keep the peace in the house. We didn't know he was actually going to hurt you this badly. We thought it was just sibling rivalry. You are our son. We love you so much. We need to stick together now more than ever. We need to be a united family to get through this. A family? I repeated, my voice raspy but incredibly steady. Yes, exactly. My father eagerly jumped in, practically salivating at the perceived opening. Your grandmother is understandably upset right now, but she highly respects you and your opinion. If you just talk to her, Julian, if you just explain to her that we were heavily manipulated by Marcus and we are innocent in this, she might reconsider the harsh eviction. She might reinstate my position at the holding company so I can provide for your mother. We can start entirely over, Julian. Just you, me, and your mother. The happy family we were always meant to be, without Marcus. It was genuinely breathtaking. The absolute, sociopathic, unmitigated audacity was truly breathtaking to behold. They weren't apologizing for watching me bleed on the stairs. They weren't apologizing for actively blaming me for the brutal assault. They weren't apologizing for a lifetime of neglect. They were aggressively apologizing because the massive ATM had been abruptly shut off, and I was the only person left on Earth who possessed the PIN code. I slowly looked over at Nurse Claire, who was standing quietly in the corner of the room near the medical supplies, her arms crossed tightly, watching my parents with a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. I looked at Grandma Beatrice, who had quietly rolled her wheelchair deeper into the bay, her weathered face an unreadable, impenetrable mask of stone. Then, I turned my head and looked directly into my father's desperate, pleading, pathetic eyes. When I was 16 years old, I said slowly, deliberately ensuring that every single word carried the exact, crushing weight of my lifelong trauma. You handed me an application to the grocery store. You explicitly told me that getting a minimum wage job would build character. You said it would teach me vital financial responsibility. My father swallowed incredibly hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. Julian, please, that was years ago. We were just trying to teach you the value of. When I was 18, I continued, completely cutting him off, raising my voice just enough to command absolute silence. You went to the bank and drained my entire college fund, the fund Grandma Beatrice set up for me. You stole my future to pay for Marcus's destination wedding. When I confronted you, you told me that family sacrifices for family. You told me I was smart enough to figure it out on my own with student loans. My mother began to openly, loudly sob, burying her face deeply in her trembling hands, unable to make eye contact with me. And today, I said, my voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous, icy whisper. You stood right over my broken, bleeding body, watched me gasp for air on that concrete floor, and aggressively told me to shut my mouth so your favorite son wouldn't get in trouble. You stepped over me. I took a very deep, incredibly painful breath, my heavily broken ribs protesting violently against the bandages. But I absolutely refused to break eye contact with the man who had failed me my entire life. You want to know what I truly think about family now, Richard? I asked. They both stared at me, holding their breath, desperately waiting for the absolution they felt entirely entitled to simply because they shared my DNA. I think, I said coldly, that getting evicted from a multi-million-dollar mansion is going to build a tremendous amount of character for you, Richard. I think learning how to strictly budget a minimum wage salary to pay for a tiny apartment is going to teach you incredible financial responsibility. Susan, you are both smart enough. You will absolutely figure it out on your own. My father's face contorted in absolute, genuine shock. He looked at me as if I had just stabbed him. Julian, you can't possibly be serious. You are going to just let your own parents become homeless? You are going to let us lose everything over a sibling rivalry. It wasn't a rivalry, I corrected him sharply, my voice cutting through his delusion like a knife. It was decades of systematic abuse, and you didn't just allow it to happen. You actively, continuously sponsored it. I looked over at Nurse Claire, giving her a small, exhausted nod. Claire, could you please have hospital security completely escort these two strangers off the premises? They are causing my blood pressure to spike to dangerous levels, and I would really like to get some uninterrupted rest. With absolute, genuine pleasure, Julian, Claire said, a fierce, highly satisfied smile breaking across her face. She stepped forward aggressively, pointing her finger firmly toward the hallway. You heard the patient. Get out of this room, right now, or I will have you both arrested and charged for trespassing in a restricted, secure medical facility. My mother desperately tried to reach for my hand one last, pathetic time, screaming my name over and over, but Dr. Lin physically blocked her path with his broad shoulders. My father, realizing it was completely over, grabbed her arm roughly, his face bright red with a toxic mixture of intense humiliation and heavily suppressed rage, and violently dragged her out of the trauma bay. As their frantic, defeated footsteps faded down the long hallway, completely disappearing from my life, Grandma Beatrice rolled her wheelchair up to the immediate side of my hospital bed. She reached out with her frail, trembling, age-spotted hand and gently, lovingly rested it over my uninjured left hand. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Julian," she whispered, a single, genuine tear escaping her steely eyes and rolling down her cheek. "You finally did it. You finally broke the chain." I closed my eyes, the immense, heavy exhaustion of a lifetime of fighting for basic respect finally catching up to me. For the very first time in 24 years, I wasn't afraid of Marcus walking into the room. I wasn't desperately, pathetically seeking my parents' hollow approval. I was completely, beautifully, undeniably free. Exactly 6 months later, the heavy, incredibly humid, suffocating heat of the intense summer had finally, mercifully faded away, replaced by the crisp, golden, refreshing afternoon light of late autumn. I stood quietly on the expansive, beautifully crafted wraparound wooden porch of Grandma Beatrice's historic Victorian home. The intense physical scars from that horrific day in the hospital stairwell had mostly healed. My ribs no longer ached with a dull throb when it rained, and after months of incredibly grueling, painful, and dedicated physical therapy sessions, I had successfully regained almost full mobility and strength in my right wrist. But the most profound, impactful changes weren't physical at all. They were the invisible, monumental, tectonic shifts in my entire reality and psychological state. My life had completely transformed into something I never, ever thought was possible for someone like me. The legal and financial fallout from that day at the hospital was incredibly swift, utterly brutal, and entirely merciless. Marcus, entirely stripped of his protective golden child armor and finally facing the terrifying, unyielding reality of a ruthless, ambitious district attorney armed with a crystal-clear audio confession of attempted murder, completely and utterly crumbled. Without my father's incredibly deep pockets to hire a shark like Arthur Thorne to manipulate the system, Marcus was assigned a heavily overworked, underpaid public defender. The exhausted lawyer took exactly one look at the mountain of evidence, listened to the chilling audio tape once, and bluntly told Marcus to get on his knees and beg the prosecutor for a plea deal before they decided to seek the absolute maximum sentence at a very public trial. Desperate to avoid a highly publicized, embarrassing attempted murder trial that he was absolutely mathematically guaranteed to lose, Marcus pleaded guilty to felony aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the concrete stairs, and premeditated intent to cause grievous bodily harm. The presiding judge, a no-nonsense woman who was clearly deeply disgusted by the audio recording of Marcus casually discussing my potential permanent brain damage as a convenient outcome, showed absolutely zero leniency in her courtroom. Marcus was sentenced to a mandatory minimum of 4 solid years in a maximum security state penitentiary, to be followed immediately by 5 years of strict, heavily monitored probation. I didn't bother going to his sentencing hearing. I didn't need to see him crying in a bright orange jumpsuit with shackles around his ankles to find my personal closure. The exact moment the judge banged her heavy wooden gavel, Marcus effectively ceased to exist in my universe. As for my parents, their rapid, devastating downfall was an absolute masterclass in poetic, karma-driven justice. Grandma Beatrice absolutely did not bluff about a single thing. The irrevocable trust was completely ironclad, heavily fortified by the best legal minds money could buy. She aggressively and legally evicted them from the beautiful, sprawling, 5-bedroom suburban colonial home they had lived in for 20 years. A house they arrogantly loved to brag about hosting lavish parties in at their exclusive country club, conveniently and constantly omitting the fact that Beatrice actually owned the deed the entire time. With his massive monthly allowance permanently severed and his highly lucrative, prestigious position at Beatrice's corporate holding company instantly terminated, my father found himself entirely, shockingly unemployable in his upper management sector. His reputation in our city's incredibly tight-knit corporate community was completely radioactive after the sordid details of the police investigation and the elder abuse allegations heavily leaked to the local press. To avoid absolute, catastrophic bankruptcy, my parents were forced to drastically, painfully downsize their entire existence. They had to frantically sell their expensive luxury cars, auction off my mother's extensive collection of diamond jewelry and designer bags, and move into a cramped, highly depressing two-bedroom apartment on the loud, undesirable side of the city. Furthermore, the court explicitly mandated that they must attend intense, weekly psychological family therapy sessions to address their severe, toxic enabling behavior and deeply ingrained narcissistic family dynamics. Over the past few months, they had desperately tried to reach out to me a dozen times through various court-appointed mediators, sending long, rambling emails, constantly begging for a reconciliation meeting, desperately claiming they were doing the deep work and that they missed their only son. I completely ignored every single one of them. I blocked their numbers, marked their emails as spam, and instructed Mr. Vance to handle all necessary communications. My therapist, a brilliant, highly empathetic woman named Dr. Eris, whom Beatrice had personally hired for me right after I left the hospital, helped me clearly understand a vital, life-changing truth. Absolute forgiveness does not ever require a relationship. I could choose to forgive them in my own heart for being deeply broken, incredibly toxic people, allowing myself to release the heavy burden of anger, but I was under absolutely no obligation whatsoever to give them a front-row seat to my beautifully healed life. My internal peace was incredibly expensive, bought with blood and broken bones, and I was absolutely no longer willing to subsidize their emotional comfort with my own sanity. Julian, are you seriously going to stand out there daydreaming all day? Or are you actually going to come inside and help me with these massive scones before I drop them? I turned around, a genuine, completely unburdened smile breaking across my face. Walking energetically up the front wooden steps of the porch, carrying a massive, heavily overloaded white bakery box, was Claire. After the horrific incident at the hospital, Nurse Claire and I had intentionally stayed in very close touch. What initially started as routine, professional check-in texts about my physical therapy schedule and pain management had rapidly blossomed into a deep, foundational, incredibly loyal friendship. She was a fiercely protective, incredibly grounded, no-nonsense person who had seen me at my absolute, humiliating lowest and didn't judge me for it for a single second. She was now a permanent, highly anticipated fixture at our Sunday afternoon teas. I'm coming. I laughed genuinely, walking quickly down the porch steps to take the heavy bakery box from her hands. You know perfectly well Beatrice is going to loudly complain that you bought the blueberry ones instead of the cranberry ones, right? She hates change. Beatrice can loudly complain all she absolutely wants. She deeply loves my blueberry scones and we both know it. It's the highlight of her week. Claire shot back with a playful wink, following me through the heavy oak front door and into the grand foyer. The inside of the expansive house was incredibly warm, comfortably filled with the rich, comforting scent of brewing Earl Grey tea and burning cedar firewood from the hearth. Grandma Beatrice was sitting comfortably in her favorite, plush velvet armchair right by the large bay window, a thick, expensive cashmere blanket draped warmly over her lap. Her health had stabilized significantly since the massive surgery, mostly, her lead cardiologist said, because the massive, suffocating source of chronic stress, my parents and Marcus, had been entirely surgically removed from her daily life. You're 5 minutes late, Claire, Beatrice noted, adjusting her reading glasses, though her bright blue eyes were twinkling with obvious affection. Traffic on the interstate was an absolute nightmare, Beatrice. Don't be grumpy, I brought the good butter, Claire replied, expertly and quickly plating the warm pastries on the fine china in the kitchen. We comfortably settled into our usual Sunday routine. Hot tea, sweet pastries, and easy, incredibly comfortable conversation. It was a vital healing ritual, a quiet, beautiful celebration of the chosen family I had meticulously, carefully built from the absolute, smoking ashes of the toxic one that had tried to completely destroy me. As I sat there in the comfortable silence, slowly sipping my hot tea and listening to Claire and Beatrice playfully argue about local city council politics, I felt a deep, intensely resonant sense of purpose course through my veins. I had recently taken over the day-to-day corporate operations of the massive real estate holding company, working closely and learning everything I could from Mr. Vance. I wasn't just managing the immense wealth to get richer. I was completely restructuring its core purpose. I had successfully convinced Beatrice to legally allocate a massive, significant portion of the liquid assets to fully fund a massive scholarship and housing program for young adults who were confirmed victims of domestic and financial abuse, helping them safely pay for college and secure housing without crippling, impossible debt. I was officially turning my darkest trauma into an absolute weapon of mass creation. "By the way," Beatrice said, her tone suddenly shifting to something slightly more serious, cutting through the comfortable atmosphere. She reached carefully into the deep pocket of her thick cardigan and pulled out a standard, slightly crumpled white envelope, heavily stamped with official red ink. She placed it gently, almost hesitantly, on the center of the wooden coffee table. "This arrived in the mail yesterday afternoon. It was officially forwarded from the holding company's secure P.O. box." I looked closely at the envelope. The return address printed in the corner was a maximum security state correctional facility. The messy, slanted handwriting was absolutely unmistakable. It was Marcus. The entire room went completely, suffocatingly silent. Claire stopped entirely mid-bite of her scone, her eyes darting nervously between the heavily stamped envelope on the table and my face. Grandma Beatrice watched me incredibly carefully, offering no unsolicited advice, simply waiting quietly for me to dictate the absolute terms of my own reality and reaction. For a brief, fleeting, terrifying second, the old Julian, the terrified, hypervigilant, constantly abused little brother, felt a very familiar, painful spike of anxiety in the center of his chest. What exactly did he want from me now? Was he aggressively threatening me from behind the safety of iron bars? Was he pathetically begging for commissary money? Was he trying to manipulate me into signing an affidavit to reduce his sentence? I slowly reached out across the table and picked up the envelope. It felt surprisingly thin and light. I grabbed a heavy silver letter opener from the side table, sliced the top cleanly open with one swift motion, and pulled out a single, heavily creased sheet of cheap-lined notebook paper. I unfolded it carefully and began to read silently, my eyes scanning his messy handwriting. "Julian, I'm not writing this letter to ask for your forgiveness. I know I absolutely do not deserve it, and my mandatory prison therapist made it very, very clear that you owe me absolutely nothing for the rest of our lives. Being locked in an 8x10 concrete cell for 23 hours a day gives you a massive amount of time to realize you are not the center of the universe. It breaks you down. I am writing this strictly because I feel I owe you the absolute truth about how things escalated so violently and quickly at the end. Yes, I was incredibly jealous of you. Yes, I was furious about the inheritance and the money, but I wasn't the only one whispering in your ear, and I wasn't the only one who wanted you gone. For 6 entire months before the incident on the stairs, our cousin Gavin was calling my cell phone almost every single day. He was the one who explicitly told me about the will change. He works at the downtown law firm as a paralegal, and he illegally peeked at Grandma's highly confidential files. He was the one who kept aggressively telling me that you were planning to kick Mom and Dad out on the street the second Grandma died to punish us all. He constantly convinced me that you were laughing at me behind my back, mocking my failed career. He kept saying over and over, if Julian just wasn't around, you'd get the entire estate, and then I could help you manage the portfolio to make us both rich. He wound me up like a cheap, stupid toy and pointed me directly at you. He desperately wanted us to violently destroy each other so he could easily swoop in as the incredibly supportive, responsible nephew and manipulate Grandma into giving him control of the trust. I was stupid, incredibly greedy, and arrogant enough to let him pull my strings without ever questioning his motives. I pulled the trigger on that stairwell, and I am paying the absolute highest price for it. I ruined my own life, but you need to watch your back, Julian. Gavin is an absolute snake in the grass, and he is still out there, playing the good guy, waiting for an opening. Don't bother replying to this. Just stay safe. Marcus. I read the letter a second time, letting the incredibly toxic words truly sink into my brain. This was the final twist. Cousin Gavin, the quiet, seemingly supportive, entirely forgettable cousin who always showed up to large family events with a polite, unassuming smile and a cheap bottle of wine. The one who had immediately texted me when I was lying in the hospital bed, offering his deepest, most sincere condolences for the terrible family drama. He had been the completely invisible, malicious puppet master the entire time, constantly stoking Marcus's profound, dangerous narcissism and endless greed, heavily hoping to orchestrate a fatal, catastrophic collision so he could quietly collect the highly lucrative debris. "What does it say?" Claire asked softly, breaking the heavy silence in the room, her voice laced with genuine concern. I looked up from the lined paper. A year ago, this exact revelation would have sent me into a blind, terrifying panic. I would have felt completely betrayed, utterly terrified, and completely overwhelmed by the sheer, inescapable toxicity of my extended bloodline. I would have felt like I could trust absolutely no one. But sitting here right now, inside a historic house I legally owned, surrounded warmly by people who would literally fight to the death to protect my peace, completely backed by an ironclad legal trust and a team of ruthless, incredibly expensive lawyers, I didn't feel a single ounce of fear. I just felt a profound, overwhelming, almost exhausting pity for every single one of them. "It's from Marcus," I said incredibly calmly, my voice completely steady. "He's trying to warn me that our cousin Gavin was actually the one secretly manipulating him for months, desperately hoping to steal the entire inheritance by getting us to violently destroy each other." Grandma Beatrice's eyes narrowed dangerously, a familiar, terrifying spark of corporate ruthlessness igniting in her gaze. "Gavin? I never liked that boy's shifty eyes. They were always too close together. Do you want me to immediately have Mr. Vance look deeply into his employment at the law firm? We could have him completely disbarred and criminally charged for severely violating attorney-client privilege and instigating violence. I will ruin him by Friday." I looked down at the letter one last, final time. I clearly saw the desperate, pathetic manipulation of a deeply broken family, the endless, vicious cycle of absolute greed, constant backstabbing, and highly toxic maneuvering. They were all playing a vicious, miserable, zero-sum game of chess, entirely destroying their own pathetic lives for money they didn't even earn. I didn't want to play their stupid game anymore. I stood up from my comfortable chair, walked slowly over to the grand stone fireplace where a small, warm fire was crackling pleasantly to combat the autumn chill. Without a single word of hesitation, without a shred of doubt in my mind, I tossed Marcus's letter directly into the hottest part of the orange flames. The cheap paper rapidly curled, blackened, and turned completely to ash in less than 5 seconds. "No," I said firmly, turning back to face Beatrice and Claire, feeling significantly lighter than I had ever felt in my entire 24 years on this earth. "Let Gavin live with his pathetic, failed schemes. Let him wonder why he never got a dime. If he ever tries to come anywhere near us, Mr. Vance can absolutely deal with him. But I am not going to spend another single second of my beautiful life endlessly chasing the toxic ghosts of a family that never truly loved me. They are completely dead to me. All of them." Claire smiled incredibly proudly, lifting her delicate teacup in a silent, respectful toast to my decision. Beatrice nodded slowly, a look of profound, deeply earned respect permanently settling on her weathered face. I walked back and sat back down in my chair, taking a deep, calming breath of the fragrant, warm tea. The hidden security camera in that cold hospital stairwell had successfully caught the absolute worst, most terrifying moment of my entire life. It had perfectly captured a brutal, life-threatening assault, a massive, unforgivable betrayal, and the horrific, heartbreaking reality of my parents' entirely conditional love. But looking back on it all now, sitting in this beautiful room, I realized that camera captured something far, far more important. It captured the exact, beautiful moment my heavy chains were permanently broken. It captured the necessary, violent destruction of a toxic illusion, successfully forcing me to finally build my reality on solid, unbreakable ground. Sometimes, hitting absolute rock bottom on a cold, unforgiving concrete landing is the only possible way to realize you finally have a solid foundation to stand up on. You cannot ever heal in the exact same toxic environment that originally made you sick. You absolutely have to be willing to walk away from the people who share your DNA if they are actively, aggressively poisoning your soul. I am Julian. I am 24 years old. I successfully survived my family. And for the very first time in my entire life, I am exactly where I belong. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand and walk completely away from toxic, manipulative relatives in order to protect your own peace, your finances, and your sanity? Share your incredible story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are absolutely not alone in this fight for freedom. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey.